I wanted to start this video out by criticizing how the Switch re-release package of Super Mario 3D World doesn't include Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, only to find out that the spin-off had already been ported to the Switch and the 3DS, and it got Odyssey-themed DLC. I don't remember this happening, or more likely, I did know about it, but willingly forgot as the game was, and still is, $40, not including the DLC. I usually don't care about how expensive a game is, but that one gets to me for some reason. Maybe I'll try to play it one day, only for when I attempt to purchase it, I'll find out Nintendo has taken it off the eShop for some reason. Which reminded me at the time of writing this that I had an hour and a half before the limited electronic run of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light would no longer be available for some reason. I probably won't even play it, but hopefully they put out official English releases of Genealogy and Thracia at some point, and hopefully they get remakes sometime soon. Anyway, that's completely off topic, as it's time to talk about Bowser's Fury now that I've finished my unplanned previous video talking loosely around Super Mario 3D World. That I recommend watching after this one if you haven't. It's not really about 3D World, but if you want to learn about how people process and reason out an experience's quality, then please check it out. But if you did watch it, just know I'm not going to be shitting on Bowser's Fury in this video just cause it's an open world game. In fact, that was probably one of the best aspects of it, but we'll get there. Let's rewind a bit first and give a proper introduction. Having already played Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U, I wasn't fiending for a Switch port of the game, but I was naturally looking forward to the inevitable re-release as a larger number of people would finally get a chance to play my favorite Mario game. But more importantly, since I had already played it, the prospect of the port containing additional content and hopefully online multiplayer, which it did get, was incredibly appealing. And I was expecting this port much sooner than we ended up getting it, considering how frequently Wii U games had been getting transferred to the Switch, especially with 3D World considered one of, if not the best game on the bygone system. But the questionable time frame made a whole lot of sense when the port was finally announced, as it isn't simply an enhanced re-release, but a package deal that also contains Bowser's Fury, a standalone game that uses 3D World assets and mechanics as a foundation to build a unique open-world Mario experience, instead of the familiar course-based or sandbox level design the series is known for. Which was exciting to see announced, as even though I'm naturally averse to open-world structures, I'm all for unique experiences and new takes on existing properties, even if I ultimately prefer there to have just been additional courses, content, and playable characters for 3D World instead of getting Bowser's Fury in the Switch port. At least they added the air dive. Now, regardless of my personal takes, it's questionable as to why they decided to make Bowser's Fury instead of executing the simpler task of porting an existing property. Like, why make what feels to be a user fan mod, but in an official capacity, instead of just focusing on the next big 3D Mario game that's due up now that we're pushing 4 years since Odyssey's release? Well, I think it's because they could kill two birds with one stone, that they could buff up a re-release of a precious product by repurposing an existing test model for the next big project, and that doing this gives them more time and experience to see what works, what doesn't, and how people feel about the structural direction the series' next big entry may have. Now, I of course don't know any of this for sure, but I think it makes a lot of sense that the next big 3D Mario game may have heavy open world and deeper adventure elements in it, since Odyssey featured the largest scale sandboxes and most diverse degree of adventure and puzzle solving the series had seen so far. So I have a lot of confidence in saying that Bowser's Fury is a test and proof of concept to see if the traditional 3D Mario formula can expand to a seamless, larger scale. And personally, I really dug the discovery and exploration aspect this open world structure provides, as it's fun to move around in Mario games, and in open worlds where half the time you're moving from point A to point B, it should be fun or feel good to do so, and this game nails that. But before further picking apart the game's open world and eventually critiquing the whole experience, I want to take a moment to clarify what exactly the level structures of course-based, sandbox, and open world are, as this is much of what this video is and already has been about. But also, I want to talk about these level structures because some cementing and clarification of genre definition is good practice, as people often don't know what the words and phrases they use and discuss mean, even if they could intuitively identify and classify something as such due to mere exposure and nuance of hearing and experiencing the concept. That's just how communication works. That's just language. So first off, what is a course-based structure? This one's straightforward, as these are level structures typically constrained by a timer and follow a mostly linear design that strings platforming obstacles together with a goal of some kind at the end, i.e., that is an obstacle course. Wow. The 2D Mario games in 3D World and Land use this level structure, and Galaxy sort of does, but don't worry about Galaxy. Then a sandbox structure is an open format with densely populated gameplay design, that the player isn't constricted to a series of obstacles, but that the level itself is seamlessly connected and made up of obstacles and content designed around the core gameplay, disguised in whatever aesthetic the level features. This structure is called a sandbox for very appropriate reasons. One is that in a sandbox, everything you want to use and play with is within close reach, and two, everything in the sandbox, meaning the sand, is what you're playing with, that there's no gaps or filler time in the play. So in games, this means a sandbox level is constructed to accommodate constant, free-form, juicy gameplay. Then following that analogy, you can think of open world games as the entire park or playground, that there's open, plain space that must be traversed to get to the different recreational equipment, unless it's one of those radical castle types that strews together many different obstacles, because then it's a sandbox even if it isn't literally. Now I should note that because of the definition of a sandbox structure, a game like GTA can be considered sandbox, as its world is designed for constant core gameplay, since the focus is killing and traveling. Like, you steal cars, drive them, and then murder people, and the entire game space accommodates this, thus sandbox, even if thematically it feels and operates more like an open world. And this just goes to show that sandbox and open world are two sides of the same free-form, open-ended coin, that there is significant crossover between the two, but there are some major factors that make a game lean towards being an open world compared to a sandbox. First is seamlessness, that everything is connected without load screens or compartmentalization like how pure sandbox games separate their content. Second is density of major content, which is a measure of how much travel time and space there is between gameplay hotspots. If an evenly distributed heat map could be drawn from the level design, then it's a sandbox. But if it's more scatterplot or, I don't know, looks like islands, then it's an open world. Third, and probably the biggest factor, is intent. That it's an open world game if much of the game space is not so much designed for gameplay as it is to create a realized world. Obviously, all games strive for a unified aesthetic, well, typically, but open world games typically have assets that fill the world for the sake of creating a space that could be considered somewhat real. And then lastly is an ideal element for an open world structure, but not a necessity, as it's far from easy to pull off, and that is little to no restriction as to where a player can go, as well as how and when they want to progress completion of the game. While striving for this is admirable, it's just so infeasible to really pull this off, at least while staying proportionate to the map sizes and project scales of modern games, and the notion of game requires restriction and rules of some kind, so you end up really just making a simulation when it's that open-ended. Though I'm not an open world aficionado, so there's probably plenty out there that manages this well enough. But regardless of that, let's get back to talking about Bowser's Fury's open world design, which is one that is filled with mostly mini courses treated as sandboxes, with the general open world design being something of a sandbox as well, due to the game being a platformer, which means the movement capabilities are the core mechanics, so naturally the game space accommodates this ubiquitously, even if spread out more than usual. But thankfully, because of this platforming design that makes Mario Mario, Bowser's Fury has a tight open world, and it was brilliant to set it in a body of water with islands, as this made for one of the best Mount Companion implementations I've ever experienced. Like, if you played it, you know, I know, and the developers certainly know, that Plessie is the MVP of Bowser's Fury. I imagine they gave him the spotlight moment he gets at the end because of how imbued and necessary, or should I say necessary, he was to making the game's open world structure operate as well as it does. And they also gave him the run back since he was the worst controlling thing in 3D World, especially if you had your fucking friends with you. And now he's an unstoppable sliding drifting monster. And it wasn't just how he controlled, it was the whole implementation. Like, fuck the mount calling button and get on command prompts. There's water everywhere, just have him constantly emerge near Mario and then you just jump on him and half a second later you're on the other side of the map having slid over every single island along the way. Brilliant. Easy. If the next game's not in a lake, they need to make sure to include something that can live up to Plessie's implementation in Bowser's Fury or not even try. Or just let Mario transform into something that's intended to traverse far distances. But regardless, if the open structure is the intent and desire, since the game's a platformer, I'd like to see more designated minor obstacles for the mounted interims. There's a good amount of this in Bowser's Fury, I just think it'd be fitting to include more and would provide deeper engagement. Like, for example, it could just be gaps in the environment to jump over, or shifting pathways, or imagine those plessie rings that set up an obstacle course for plessie would be required to pass through in sequence to open up a path or enable a platform, making the longer distance traversal integral to the game design rather than a formality because of the open world desired to be created. Maybe not the best design concepts, but hopefully the point is clear. Now, apart from plessie, I think my favorite part of the experience was the joy of seeing how fun the literal building blocks of the Mario series are, and how simple and effective it can be to cobble a bunch together to make unique escapades that are scattered throughout the lake, typically detached from the main islands, to make content for an open world game. As these provided a sense of discovery that this game needed much more of. Like, there's only a handful of instance-contained areas in the whole game, and I was expecting to find a ton scattered throughout, especially from Bowser Jr.'s only purpose, as the hidden question marks were pretty well hidden and fun to find, and would be a perfect way to implement more separated areas. But instead, most are just more power-ups you already maxed out. But that at least made finding the gold pipes all the better, even if they were also pretty underwhelming. Like, I wanted to discover mini dungeons and courses, like how you could go up into the clouds, or that there could have been mystery house challenges to find, something absent from Bowser's Fury yet are one of the best features from 3D World, so it's a shame they're nowhere to be found. The point being, I think the game's world design should have focused on things like these rather than the island content with lackluster level design, as this is an open world game, and a sense of discovery and an accommodation to such element is crucial. And yeah, this may have tilted the game to be more of a sandbox than an open world, but hey, it's Mario, and the shoe fits. But regardless, turns out it's fun to interact with Mario game spaces, and getting that little taste of discovery was still satisfying even if there typically wasn't anything worthwhile to obtain from the exploration, outside of intrinsic enjoyment and sometimes a catshine, which obviously collection of such things is the goal of the game, but a crucial component that makes open worlds tick are all the little things to obtain or solve scattered throughout. Like in Breath of the Wild, you're constantly finding and collecting new shit, literally and figuratively, not necessarily stuff you want or need, but it's designed with continuous scavenging in mind to keep the player constantly engaged. I know people don't like the weapon durability system in the game, reasonably so, I don't really care for it, but that's part of what makes the game tick as well as it does, cause it's fun to find weapons. It's not that they necessarily wanted to make it that way, but if you want to put something in a square hole, it's a good idea to make it square-shaped. And that game's also got significant dynamic puzzle mechanics that they could fill the open world to accommodate, whereas in a platformer there's only so much you can do, even if it is fun to yahoo all over the place. So while I think there's some fun stuff in Bowser's Fury's open world, another layer or two needs to be stacked onto it if this structure will continue into a larger scope project. And I think a good aspect to lean into to better accommodate the open world structure is the power-up system. In Bowser's Fury, it was nice to have the answer on hand to pretty much any given scenario. Like you were just switching movesets or boss weapons to better handle a situation, and it was just cool to have my choice of power-up on hand. And while there's a little bit of focus and world consideration of this system, like some secondary areas requiring the catsuit to bypass whatever obstruction it has, or how in some areas that are focused on a particular power-up or mechanic that the collectibles there are placed with these in mind, the game space could have still used much more of this type of designation with the different power-ups, ideally in turn making them a more precious resource because of this. It also makes the coin collecting much more worthwhile than the formality to legacy it mostly is in this game. though it was nice to see the greater loss of coins upon death compared to the measly 10 lost in Odyssey, since it adds some heavier weight to a fail state. It's not much, but it's nice to feel some pressure. Good pressure, like sleeping between two mattresses, or putting a heavy blanket on your feet when trying to sleep. Give it a try. You'll thank me later. But while that's a possible fix for Bowser's Fury, in general, I think that the open world structure for a Mario game could work significantly better if this power-up system was designed in a classical adventure sense, like the Metroid or Zelda series. That instead of a single instance power-up that could be knocked off, the game and world is designed around gaining permanent power-ups to allow the player character to do more and go farther. And this isn't a far cry from what previous games contain. The other ones just feature more transient enhancements that help in general to an obstacle's completion, not necessarily that it's required. Though, there's plenty of instances where a certain power-up is needed to obtain something. So if there was some reworking of the existing power-ups and enhancements to provide permanent, varied effect to Mario's movement capabilities and actions, and that items to be collected in the open world reinforce and allow such advanced abilities, I think it'd be a strong design. But it is Mario, so it doesn't need to and shouldn't get that crazy compared to other action platformers and adventure games where there's a ton of resources for every action. For Mario, it could be as simple as using coins to perform these techniques, meaning you're basically always able to do them, but the design would still incentivize the player to collect coins more than usual, which would be a good way to rework this antiquated system if a lives system is to be no more. That said, I really don't want to take away from the purity of Mario's platforming formula. Like, people don't like Sunshine because of its heavy gimmick focus rather than high quality general platforming design. But still, I'm just trying to make a design square-shaped to fit into the square hole. And this idea isn't that far of a cry from what Bowser's Fury's got going on, nor from the rest of the series, especially Odyssey, since it's had the greatest focus on unique mechanics to solve particular scenarios in a Mario open structure to date. But even still, if all that sounds to be too much for a Mario game, then really, screw the open world structure. The Mario series is a simple, straightforward, effective platformer at its core, so the game structure should simply accommodate that. So I think instead of an open world to increase the scale and provide new structure, an interconnected hub-to-hub design, like just a bunch of sandboxes seamlessly, and tightly sewn together sounds like the way to go for me. This would make for a broader open structure without all the filler a Super Mario game doesn't naturally fill. Though regardless, I think I'd still like to see a permanent power-up system in play since Odyssey and Fury effectively had this and it was a whole lot of fun. But let's call it there for discussion of the open world aspect of Bowser's Fury and the future of Mario, and let's get to talking about the rest of Bowser's Fury and how it's alright, it's okay. Like, it's good, it's definitely good, but it's just not as good as the others. I did like how, apart from it being a test model, it felt like a love letter amalgam of some other 3D Mario games. Obviously, it's 3D World at its core, with some added functionality from Odyssey, but more than anything, the game seems and felt to be a spiritual follow-up to Sunshine, what with Bowser Jr. being prominent and its aesthetic design. The water, in tropical setting at least. The ridiculously present motif of everything being a cat was of course the amplified 3D World direction, and I love cats, so big points to the game there. Though despite the cat motif's prevalence, and minor spoilers for something that doesn't happen in the game, and major spoilers for stuff that does, I was hoping for a... Oh, let me wait a second. 2, 3. I was hoping for a Giga God slaying Meowser fight instead of Kaiju Bowser just gaining a few more moves and a bigger health bar after each defeat. But plessie being the one to go Giga Cat mode at the end and take out Bowser was fitting and hilarious, so I'll just assume if it was the other way around, I'd have been saying how plessie should have gotten a special moment in the ending due to his role in making the game work as well as it does. And Cat Bowser was already a thing in 3D World, so it's not a big deal. But still, I wanted a Kaiju Cat fight. All there is to it. Regardless though, I do still think there should have been something additional and unique to God slaying Bowser once the 100 cat shines were collected. Sure, there were some cool aesthetic differences, and he had more HP, and the chase sequence on plessie was harder, but I was still hoping for something more in the 1v1, especially considering how natural it is to collect all 100 shines due to the brevity of the game. But as for the huge fucking Bowser everywhere system, it occurred much more frequently than I was expecting, and was a decent gimmick to keep the open world engaging, as a good bit of the world design and catshines were dependent on Bowser being awakened, making it so the player could route out their play based on how soon until Bowser starts wreaking havoc again, which big props for making this timer a natural piece of conveyance in the world design in the lake. But like, the idea that I have to wait for Bowser to show up and then bait out an attack so he destroys some blocks isn't very exciting. However, it never felt to be a problem due to his frequency, and if anything, the Fury blocks were just another consideration to make the open world work better than otherwise. So once again, it's a design just trying to make the game structure work. But it's almost like accommodating for an open world doesn't make for the greatest gameplay in a lot of cases. But anyway, I do think there could have been some greater impact to the world with this system, as much of the game space is drastically altered during these events and it makes for significant tone and presentation, but in practice the world upheaval felt superfluous due to how little uptime Bowser would have. But in a dynamic open world where you can progress in a variable fashion, having unique environment changes for every part of the game space makes for unique possibilities in every player's individual experience. So even if I didn't feel much impact from it, I hope someone did. In this world, altering design isn't meant to be enjoyed per se, as the levels are often modified to provide alternate routes to finish a challenge faster and collect a shine to get Bowser off your ass. So I think the system and design works for what it is, as this game's design was all made in consideration for the main event of throwing hands with God-slaying Bowser as Giga Cat Mario. And while the fight wasn't the greatest thing ever, it's still pretty fucking radical, as there's few things cooler than giant monsters smacking each other. Kaijus are cool. I watched that monkey smack that lizard, and really felt the caveman in me hollering. Good shit. I like the monkey more. And I like the lizard a lot. Anyway, I feel like I've been all over the place with how I've talked about this game, that I should have had a better order of approach to the different aspects like I usually do, at least how I think I usually do, but I guess that's fitting for discussion primarily focused on an open world structure. But let me finally get to talking about this game's biggest issue, which is its handling of the core gameplay content, meaning the islands. While each of these are unique and have a well-defined, distinguished idea that give them an identity, like the slope for the ice skate or the volcano with the switchboard platforms, the problem is that most of them are mini courses that are reused as if they were a mini sandbox, making for a lackluster delivery of both types. But while the structures of the islands don't make for the greatest repeated content, they are typically altered in a significant way so that the previous path isn't the same as before, whether that's actual platform and critical path structure alteration, or simply adding or changing enemies, meaning they made the most out of what they got. And the repeated types of activities used throughout the islands as the main catshine challenges are pretty fun, which the same can be said for all types of repeated activities in the open world, except for the kitten delivery, especially this one. It's just, I don't want to wait. But anyway, the island content isn't terrible, it's just that the gameplay delivered ends up lacking the potent focus a course structure provides, as well as the free-form fun nature of a sandbox, making for an underwhelming mix of the two. Though if you liked Galaxy, you're probably cool with this. I don't really like Galaxy though. Anyway, I personally think the islands would have worked better as purely mini sandboxes instead of mini courses, since it's an open world and the locations can be approached from numerous angles. But instead, you have to leave and then re-enter from the designated front, even if there is plenty to do around the edges. Not to say there shouldn't be any focused course locations, in fact I'd love that, but they could have just been implemented like how they are in Sunshine or Odyssey, transporting Mario to a unique location. Hell, that would even be cool in an open world setting to give the player something to hunt for in the open space. I already mentioned this. What else before I wrap up this video? Oh, the book-ended story presentation was pretty funny with how fed up Mario was with the Bowsers. You typically don't get that much personality from Mario, but him just like having his arm crossed, just no, yeah, was pretty funny. And that the explanation for why all this happened being explained in the credits through Junior's paintings was pretty cute, and the reason's funny. Though I'm curious if this is actually a teaser for a villain to come in the next game, that it'll be explained there was external tampering and wasn't just Bowser getting really pissed at his kid for fucking with him. Though the simple explanation is probably best. I'm just wondering if they'll let Bowser have a break for a game to introduce a new villain for once in a mainline game. But whatever comes, I have a lot of faith in the current Mario team with handling the spirit and personality of the series without it becoming a parody of what it is. Knock on wood. But that all said, I'll wrap up by saying that despite the game's flaws, there is some promise in the open world aspect that this game was likely made to try out. And I think the series is in good hands as the Mario team knows what's up, and I doubt they'll screw up a larger scale project, or better put, they aren't allowed to considering how precious this series is. But personally, I don't think an open world Mario game is where it's at, and it still isn't my cup of tea. I don't like open world games. But I'll definitely give it a go, as long as the game feels good and there's plenty of juicy content. And hey, maybe like I said, they'll even give a new go at the story's gravitas and delivery, do something new with the story. Odyssey was already leaning a bit in that direction, so who knows what's to come. I'm not asking for anything crazy, but it might be cool to see, and I'm looking forward to it. Also, make Luigi playable and give me a new princess or character that gets tons of risque fan art. Yeah. Thanks for watching.